What are we doing back here? What the hell's going on? We already finished Meakashi. It's over. We saw everything.
Or did we?
We actually didn't. At least not for the options we kind of chose when we started playing this game. Because when we started playing, for this mod, the creators of the mod kindly included choices that were not in the original game, but were included in the PS2/PS3 versions that could lead to potential bad endings. And for some reason, I didn't get that choice near the end of the game. So it was brought to my attention by Nert that I was supposed to get a choice when I didn't. So I went back and I re-enabled that option again just to make sure it was on, and then I rolled back up to that scene. And now we're going to get the bad ending. This scene takes place shortly after Mion/Shion has dragged our boy Keiichi to the Super Fun Time Happy Murder basement, and she has just tased him in front of her sister, who is in the cage now, and he is about to be strapped to the table and all that fun stuff. So that's sort of the setup for where we're at. So we're going to continue from there. Some of this might seem familiar, but just hang in there, I promise you. There is a bad ending here that is very different from from what we got during the stream. So, Keiichi fell down like a doll. Shion reached out to him from the other side of the bars. She screamed at me not to kill Keiichi. Go ahead, cry and blame me. Don't even think of offering your forgiveness. I am the most rotten existence in this world, so please grant me the worst possible ending. Shion begged me desperately to let Keiichi go. I simply abused her, slandered her, and disgraced her. The more Shion suffered, the deeper I'd fall into hell. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to deep enough. It wasn't deep enough to compensate for my sins. I dragged Keiichi to the table that I tried to put Satoko on and restrained him there. Keiichi began to move sluggishly. The stun gun must not have worked too well on him. So this is where we'd get the choice, that it didn't pop up when we streamed, and the check mark is an indicator that tells us that this is what we choose if we want to continue down the same route that we did while we were on stream, which leads to the game's actual conclusion. We are going to go with, at the time, I became aware of Keiichi's gaze. This is where we're going to get the bad ending. That's still a great line. He's just fucking done. Keiichi's growl resounded from the pit of his stomach. What a delightful sound. It was like he wanted to rip me apart.
私、さっき嘘をついたね。シオンを一番むごたらしく殺してやろうと思って閉じ込めておいたけど、まだ思いつかないって言ったやつ。あれが嘘。
I smiled menacingly as I laid out the huge nails and hammer specially made for the nail table.
あの子に自分のせいで死ぬ大勢の人の悲鳴をたっぷりと聞かせて、体の芯まで染み通らせてから殺すの。なかなかセンスいいでしょ。
お前は誰だ？
は？ミオンでしょ？園崎ミオン。恐怖で頭が変になっちゃった？
違うな。お前が園崎ミオンであるはずがない。
My hand stopped dead in its tracks. Kei-chan? Shit. I decided it would be too late once we reached Shion's cell. So the name guessing game is already over. Oh well, whatever. Bring it on. I'll listen to you. This is your last chance.
じゃあ、私がミオンじゃなかったら、私は誰なわけ？
Come on, Kei-chan. Guess who I am. Try and save Mion, the girl who fell in love with you. And then I heard it. I most definitely heard it. Keiichi's mouth trembled as he spoke the words, yet his eyes shone with a strong conviction, and he spoke the truth.
Shion, だな。
Wow. You're right. You actually won. You're amazing, Kei-chan. A strange feeling fills my chest as I shiver. I had convinced myself there was no way he could guess, but he did, and I couldn't help feeling a bit surprised. This Keiichi had yet again pierced through my disguise.
お前はミオンじゃない。さっきまで一緒だったミオンを返せ。
Who are you? You aren't Mion, right?
だから私、ミオン。
No, that's not it. That wasn't what I meant. You aren't Mion.
どうして私がお姉じゃないって思うんですか？
I don't know, just a feeling. In my mind, memories of the time Keiichi recognized me at the toy store had been revived. Yes, even back then, Keiichi could tell that I wasn't my sister Shion. I had feigned composure and offered a comeback with a straight face, but on the inside I was shook. We were both capable of becoming Mion or Shion, but because I was the real Mion and the only Shion legally on was only Shion legally on paper, reversing the roles was even more easier for me. Our tones of speech, quirks, and even our auras, we both had mastered each other's habits so perfectly, even our own parents were unable to tell us apart. In fact, wasn't that especially sharp Rena not able to figure out I wasn't her best friend Mion after all, despite being so close? So why? Has this Keiichi actually seen through my disguise twice?
どうして私がお姉じゃないって思うんですか？
My ears pricked up, eager to hear the answer. Keiichi's reply was a soft murmur like an insect's whisper as he gasped for breath in pain. His voice was so quiet it was nearly inaudible, but I could almost recognize the words on his lips. Yes, just a feeling, he says.
へえ。
Yet again, it was just a feeling. Didn't he say the exact same thing to me that time at the toy store? How nice, how nice. What a splendid answer. You'd think my sister of all people You'd think why my sister of all people fell in love with him. However, no, rather it was exactly because of this, along with my raving madness, the blood that was shimmering in my veins until just now rapidly began to turn chill and coagulate. If I were to describe it, it felt like stagnant muddy water flowing through a gutter. Even now, it was also hilarious. I could fall over laughing, but I didn't smile. On the contrary, my face was vacant and austere, like a no mask of frigid ice. And then the darkness seeped into the innermost depths of my mind, and I was already parting. And I was already parting with my self-restraint as a human being. I reached out to touch Keiichi's hair, matted with sweat and caked with blood. Keiichi whips his head away at once in disgust, as if he were staving off a housefly, and glares at me defiantly.
この鬼め、返せ！ミオンを返せよ！俺の最高の友人だったミオンを返せ！
Having lost liberty over his whole body, he continued to howl and cry as if he were spewing blood. I was supposed to have sold my soul to the devil and become a demon, but faced with such a bitter rejection, I felt the crumbled remnants of my emotions stir within me. My throat begins to itch, the crooks of my elbows, my wrists, and every other joint in my body begins to tingle and prickle, and I feel irrationally restless. The more the restlessness and irritation piled up, the more this squalling, whimpering person beside me felt bothersome, revolting, so awful I could slaughter him right away. To be frank, until just now I had no intention of killing Keiichi. I was truly ready to spare at least his life if he guessed the right answer. That was the rule I had decided upon. Okay, I'll admit it. Just like Shion, I had also fallen in love with Keiichi. He was so incredibly silly and good-natured, unbelievably warm-hearted and gentle. Talking to him made me feel contented. Besides, I even sympathized with him. Unlike a lot I'd dealt with so far, Keiichi was indeed just a victim, caught up in my selfish revenge drama. Now that my revenge against the Sonozaki family was almost complete, I didn't mind saving him. That may sound too convenient, but perhaps the human side of me that was fond of Keiichi wanted to save him in order to seek his forgiveness for my actions. But I've changed my mind. Having witnessed Keiichi guess the right answer before my very eyes, my heart was suffused with the stinging, gaping, and overpowering darkness as if it were freezing over. Why? Why was Shion alone able to meet such a wonderful person? Satoshi-kun could only make a vague distinction between me and Shion. Satoshi-kun abandoned me and ran away. However, this Keiichi trusts Shion. He is defending Shion, whom he values as his best friend, by seeing through my lies. And as a result, he gave up on me. Detestable, maddening, despicable, enviable, so much so that I want to kill them. That's right, the moment he defended Shion, he became one of them. He's equally guilty. You low-life scum. I despise you. I despise you. I despise you. I despise you, you fucking piece of shit. Ah, what a nuisance. Shion's screams coming from the corner of the chamber were enjoyable before, but now they felt unbearably noisy and pissed me off. How about I just get rid of Shion first? I wanted to kill her after she had the most exquisite taste of anguish and terror, but now I could barely suppress the indiscriminate urge to slaughter welling up within me. Keiichi was restlessly yelling his protest towards me. His throat closed up eventually, and he gasped for breath, hoarsely continuing to demand Mion's return.
メイドの土産なんて気の利いたものじゃないけれど、どうしても知りたがっているようだから、一つだけ教えてあげるよ。私の中に鬼が宿ったのはずいぶん前。その鬼は私を蝕み強行に駆り立てようとした。だけれど私はそれを理性で押さえつけた。鬼はそれで収まり、私はその鬼はどこかへ行ってしまったんだと思い込んでいた。でも本当は違った。私の中から出て行ったんじゃなく、私の中で眠っていただけだったの。
Yes. When I learned about Satoshi-kun's disappearance, my ailing heart had crammed itself with rage to compensate for the despair. But that was the limit of my insanity. I would never have snapped. Time had healed me, and my memories of Satoshi-kun were neatly wrapped up and pushed into the back of my
その
mind.
鬼はある小さなことをきっかけにまた目覚めてしまった。それは何に原因があったと思う？
It really was the smallest of smallest things.
鬼の私が教えるのも変だけれど、あんたがすべておかしくしてしまった元凶。
A tear rolled down my cheek. That's right. Back then, if you hadn't given the doll to Mion, none of this would have
ケイちゃん
happened.
には理解で
If
き
you
ない
had
だろう
given the
ね。
doll to Mion. My bad.
理解できなくて当然。だけどね、そこからドミノ倒しみたいにパタパタパタといろんなものが倒れ始めて、初めの小さな一つを倒したあなたに自覚がないのは当然だろうけど、あなたが元凶なの。
Back then, if Keiichi hadn't shown any affection, Shion would have been overjoyed. She wouldn't have been overjoyed and cheerfully boasted about him to me. And as I listened to her, I was reminded of Satoshi-kun. I became jealous of her for having someone she loved so close to her. It was a very small jealousy, but it awoken a demon who was sleeping deep inside of me. After that, I just let the demon take over. The demon fed upon the copious amount of sadness I held for Satoshi-kun, and in return it committed heinous acts that Satoshi-kun himself would never be happy with, all in the name of avenging him. And now the horrific events that had followed were inviting me to the realm of demons that had no return.
そんな嘘だろ。
自覚がないのは当然。でも紛れもなく元凶なのはケイちゃん。
Back then, if you hadn't chosen to give the doll to Mion, we could have arrived at a different future. No, that wasn't right. Wouldn't pinpointing Keiichi's small action as the beginning be the height of transferring blame? I was implying such a silly thing had awoken the demon inside of me. Even without Keiichi's act, it would have awoken anyway. At the end of the day, it was all my fault. I didn't fight the demon. I allowed it to reside in my soul, and I readily offered it my heart. Keiichi didn't hide his tears. They were pouring down his cheeks. Maybe he was crying in my place, as I was not free to do so, having chosen to become a tearless demon. That was why I must go on as the demon. There was no room for human emotions or hesitation anymore. And then... Shion's wails rasping like silk tearing apart along with my screams of ecstasy. The last thing I heard were those everlasting reverberations. June 1983, a case of serial disappearances occurred in Hinamizawa Village, Shishibone City. The suspect is Shion Sonozaki. Allegedly, she abducted, imprisoned, and killed 4 Hinamizawan residents, Oryo Sonozaki, Kiichiro Kimiyoshi, Rika Furude, and Satoko Hojo, between June 19th and 21st. Preliminary investigation into the incident was delayed for time due to insufficient evidence, but by chance, the case was solved rather abruptly. On the morning of the 22nd, a patrol vehicle stationed outside the Sonozaki mansion heard screams from within, and personnel infiltrated the premises as an emergency measure. The suspect's missing elder sister, Mion Sonozaki, and 2 of her classmates, Keiichi Maibara and Reina Ryugu, were taken into custody. However, Keiichi Maibara, who had previously been lured into the crime scene, had sustained stab wounds perpetrated by the suspect. He was immediately transferred to an emergency unit, but they were diagnosed as a minor injury. Having been the one with the utmost opportunity to engage in conversation with the suspect until the very end, he will be subject to interrogation once he has recovered from the shock. Furthermore, the apprehended suspect was found collapsed at a place approximately 2 meters away from where Keiichi Maibara was restrained and sustained scratch wounds on her throat. She was also transferred to an emergency facility, but was pronounced dead at 13:48 on the 22nd. The official autopsy determines that the immediate cause of death was hemorrhagic shock due to excessive blood loss. Hair pieces of skin and blood from the 4 missing people, Oryo Sonozaki, Kiichiro Kimiyoshi, Rika Furude, and Satoko Hojo, were recovered from the hidden chamber that was discovered in the outbuilding basement of the Sonozaki family property where they were supposedly killed. It was concluded that the victims were assaulted in that hidden chamber. The victims' bodies were discovered at the bottom of an old well, as per the testimony of the victim, Mion Sonozaki. In addition, investigations continue into any possible connection to the series of mysterious deaths in recent years, but no evidence of Shion Sonozaki's direct or indirect involvement has been found. There are still many obscurities to the motive behind the incident, and due to extreme non-cooperation from the Sonozaki family and residents of Hinamizawa, a large amount of time will be required to clarify matters on this front. The local police who are familiar with the region offer that this may have been an internal lynching incident as punishment for sacrilegious acts carried out against the Hinamizawa's religious beliefs. It has been established that the incident is unique and rooted in the regional community beliefs, and a cautious investigation has been ordered by the prefectural police. We expected to gain valuable hints from the missing persons and the suspect's sister, Mion Sonozaki, who were under confinement for the longest time period, but it was observed that she had sustained severe mental trauma from the incident, and her injury has been her inquiry has been postponed in favor of her psychological and physical recovery. According to her primary care physician, although her condition is fairly serious, there is a strong prospect of recovery, and she is at present undergoing rehabilitation with support from her close friends. Several weeks have passed since then. After that incident, I was rescued by Oishi-san and his team, whom Rena had summoned. I had no other after effects aside from my consciousness that had been wiped white. If I were to have any at all, it would have been the deep scars that had been left inside my heart. As I was being examined at the hospital, I was subjected to various queries from Oishi-san. I tried to answer him with whatever little I knew, but I had no idea if it met his expectations, and neither did I bear any responsibility to do so. From what I had heard, Shion had already lost too much blood by the time the police arrived, and she had stopped breathing. They urgently called for an ambulance and took her to the clinic, but there was barely any time for first aid, and she took her last breath. The silver lining was that Mion, who had been captive in her cell, was safe and taken into custody by the police. Up until the moment I lost consciousness, I was afraid that Shion may fly into a rage and murder Mion, but I was just glad that we had managed to avoid a worst-case scenario. Only when Mion was rescued, she was emaciated and had sustained severe psychological trauma. Apparently, at the time of her rescue, she had been completely unable to respond to police's questions. Right now, Mion is admitted to a large hospital in the vicinity and undergoing treatment for her psychological and physical injuries. In the beginning, when Rena and I went to visit, her eyes were downcast in desolation and she looked completely worn out. It was a horrible state to be in, but despite it all, as of late, she is on her way to recovery, finally well enough to show us a few smiles. Of course, we've been careful not to bring up Satoko or Rika-chan, and especially Shion. The police later conducted an on-site investigation at the Sonozaki House's underground storehouse several days after the incident took place. Particularly the well inside which Satoko and Rika-chan's bodies were disposed of by Shion were carefully surveyed by the prefectural forensic investigators, and true to Shion's testimony, the girls were discovered. Apparently sediment had accumulated at the bottom of the well, and hence the discovery had taken several days. Along with Satoko and the other victims, skeletal remains of what were several years, even several decades old were found, but it's not like I would know much about that. Even I was once summoned back to that place to assist with the crime scene investigation, but I didn't really help them find anything important. The Sonozaki family in Okinomiya, in other words, Mion and Shion's parents, came home every day several times along with many of their followers to formally apologize. And no matter how much my parents refused, they kept piling up banknotes worth millions of yen as compensation. And once that money had piled up to had reached a certain amount, on the same day there came an envelope with a letter instead. I have no idea what was written in the letter, but my parents had discussed amongst themselves for 2 nights straight without consulting me, and decided we would move away from Hinamizawa.
そっか、引っ越しちゃうんだね。いつ？
来月の終わり。ひなみ沢には結局半年も居つかなかったことになるな。
寂しくなるね。きっとみーちゃんも悲しむよ。
悪い。ミオンにも正直話すべきか迷ってる。
Once Rita had heard me say that, she strongly insisted I had to tell her no matter what.
確かに今みーちゃんにそれを告げるのは酷なのかもしれない。でも圭一くんが黙っていなくなっちゃう方がきっとみーちゃんは辛いと思う。だから一緒に話しに行こうね。
ああ、そうだな。
そっか。ケイちゃん、ひなみ沢からいなくなっちゃうんだ。
Even though she had heard it from me, Mion whispered those words sadly, but she didn't seem that surprised. Surely she had mentally prepared herself for this outcome somewhere inside her heart.
すまん。けど俺、いつかひなみ沢に戻ってくるつもりだ。約束する。
いいよ、無理しなくても。ここに来てもきっとケイちゃんにいいことなんて何もないんだから。
みーちゃん。
Both Rena and I wanted to say it wasn't so, but after such a tragic event, what verbal consolation could we offer that would help to Mion, who had suffered a much greater pain than we ever had? And so we just stood there, unable to say anything, just wallowing in silence.
私も東京に行こうかな。
え？
来週退院できるらしいんだけど、ここにいてもいいことあんまりないし、東京でなくてもどこか遠く、私のこともひなみ沢のことも知らない土地に行きたい。やり直せるなんて都合のいいことは考えてないけど、もう疲れちゃった。全部投げ出したいよ。
Can you blame her? Can you really blame her?
ミオン。
Mion had been forced to carry the name of the next head of the Sonozaki family and the representative of the 3 great families, all due to a small misunderstanding. Despite feeling uncertain and weary about her unplanned responsibility, she had nevertheless been earnest and given her all to fulfill her duties. But to think, all of that had been concluded in such a manner. It was such a tremendous loss that it's almost a surprise she hasn't completely lost her mind. Who can really blame Mion anymore for making such a faint-hearted remark? And so I wanted to devote even a little bit of my remaining time here for her.
そうだな、ミオン。 一緒にどこか行くか。
え？どこへ？
決まってるだろ。旅行だよ。俺がここにいられる期間はもうあまりないけど、だったらせめて少しでもいい思い出を取り返しておかないとな。東京はちょっと遠いけど、大きな町とかに足を伸ばしてうまい飯とか買い物とかさ。どうだ？
どうって言われても。
それとってもいいと思うな。行っておいでよみーちゃんね。
けどレナ一緒に来てくれないの？
After hearing that, even I grew puzzled. Hadn't I suggested all three of us hang out together? Oh, she know.
だってレナは馬になんて蹴られたくないもん。だから二人っきりでどうぞ。あ、お土産買ってきてくれると嬉しいな。はう
There's a Mion sound. Boom. Mion blushes vigorously. I was slow to react because I didn't understand what Renan was getting at, but seeing Mion's face imbued with color after such a long time, my heartbeat grew faster for a moment. No, it wasn't what I implied when I suggested the idea, but depending on the point of view, wouldn't this be an invitation to a
い
date?
かん。ちょっと調子に乗りすぎたかも。
Indeed, after seeing it that way, I was overcome with embarrassment, but there was no way I could back out after coming this far. This is all for Mion's sake. Pull yourself together, Keiichi, my bar.
どうだミオン。あ、もちろん医者と親御さんにはちゃんと了解を取るつもりだぜ。あんまり無理はさせないつもりだから考えておいてくれよ。
わかった。考えておくね。
はうみーちゃんが久々に可愛いよ。嬉しいな嬉しいな。はうはうはう。
After that, we spent the day talking about harmless stuff that happened at school or the neighborhood until it was evening. I felt like Mion had regained some of her spirit and acted a bit like she used to, so I was happy. After a few days, Mion had contacted me to say she was okay with my plan. And after spending a few more days to convince my folks and Mion's parents, we set off on a day's trip to the metropolis that had one of those bullet train stations.
しばらく見ないうちにここってすごく大きくなったんだね。
As soon as she stepped out on the station, Mion set eyes on the scenery sprawling with people and cars. She shared her feelings and excitement as she looked on admiringly. From what I heard, unless it was on a very important business, Mion rarely gets to leave the village, let alone come out to a big city like this. Because of that, everything she saw looked fresh and fascinating to her, and she pranced around merrily, almost like a child.
ケイちゃん、これからどこに行くの？
そうだな。ミオンの好みから考えて、あそこはどうだ？
The place I was pointing to, one I had checked out in advance, was a massive, beautifully decorated game arcade that towered over a corner of the station shopping square. There you go, Rhett.
なかなか盛大に遊び回ったな。
面白かった。あんなにゲームで遊んだの本当に久しぶりだよ。
As I sat down on the bench, Mion was gleefully draining her can of juice with a huge smile. That expression was unlike the gloomy one Mion had worn at the hospital. Next to me was the Mion I knew well. Earlier, we had a blast, vowing to conquer all the game consoles within the vicinity, and made quite a ruckus without caring much about people watching. Mion was enjoying herself playing with consoles she wasn't used to, and had gone on a rampage, laughing out loud, getting worked up, and challenging me to matches. Although I couldn't help thinking about what-ifs as I was playing with her, about how much fun it would have been if only it weren't just the two of us, but also Rena Satoko and Rika-chan as well. I'm sure Mion would have been thinking the same thing, which is also why I outdid myself, making so much noise, trying to battle the loneliness when I had
なあ
realized.
ミオン
何ケイちゃん。
With vain drops of sweat coating her forehead, Mion turned to face me with a broad smile. Mion's cheerfulness was most likely just her being considerate toward me for having brought her here. If that was so, then I needed to do the same for
お前
her.
全部初めてって言ってたけどそれ本当か？初プレイで2台もハイスコアに名前入れるなんてとんでもない実力だぜ。
ちっちっち4台の間違いだよケイちゃん。こういうのはセンスと勘、そして動体視力がものを言うのさ。普段の鍛錬を怠らなかった成果だよ。むしろケイちゃんはアドバンテージをひっくり返されたことを恥と思うべきだね。
おいおいちょっと待てよ。エアホッケーの時とかあれ何なんて後ろを指さして顔を向けた瞬間打ち込んできたのは反則だろ。まったく容赦のないやつだぜ。
勝てば官軍、負ければ賊軍だよ。
For the time being, it's alright if her well-being is a front. All I hope for is that someday this becomes real and she recovers her old cheerful
いやい
self.
やそれにしてもゲーセンも雰囲気が変わったよな。少し前ならタバコ臭くて暗いイメージだったけど家族連れで遊びに来る人も結構いたからちょっと驚いたぜ。
そうだね。やっぱたまにはこういうのも楽しいよね。あ、今何時ぐらい
5時くらいかな。
あー、じゃあ夕食まであと少しだね。どこかで食べて帰る？
そうだな。ファーストフードでハンバーガーなんてどうだ？
おお、いいね。あ、その前にちょっと失礼。
Mion said that and stood up from the bench. I found it odd for a minute, but then I understood her intention
店に
and...
もトイレはあるぞ。うわっ
Instead of a reply, I had empty cans thrown at me. Mion stuck her tongue out at me and left in a hurry, and after I watched her retreating figure, I plopped back down on the bench and looked up at the sky. The sky was pure blue and crystal clear, and it felt amazing. Everything seemed to be glowing, bathed in the brilliant summer sun. It was a good thing we came here. Mion also seemed to show signs of
そうだ
recovery.
な。なんなら今度はいっそ東京にでも誘ってみるか。
Oh damn, boy making a move. It would be cheaper if she stayed at our new place there, but I feel like our parents may be concerned for a while. We still needed more time to go back to how it was.
そうなると泊まる場所も探しておかないとな。あとは
Why hello there. Eh?
ああこんにちは。
いやー、ごめんケイちゃん。トイレ人いっぱいでさ。あ、結構待たせちゃったみたいだから飲み物買ってきた。どっちがいい？あれ、ケイちゃん寝ちゃったの？もうしょうがないな。女の子とのデート中に居眠りなんてエチケット違反だよ。ケイちゃん、もういつまで寝てるんだよ。ほら起きて。ケイちゃん、
What the fuck just happened? What?